The fog over San Francisco Bay slowly dissipated, revealing the gray outlines of Oakland's port cranes. The city awoke to the sound of trucks and ship horns, sounds that had become the soundtrack of life for its 500,000 residents. Among them was Samantha Reed, who stood at the window of her small apartment in the Fruitvale neighborhood, watching the morning light break through the industrial smog. At 28, Samantha had learned to live two lives. During the day, she was just Sam, a single mother who worked part-time at a beauty salon on International Boulevard, trying to make ends meet. But when the sun set, she transformed into Angela, an elegant companion for wealthy men, ready to brighten their lonely evenings for a decent fee. "Mommy, why are you up so early?" The sleepy voice of 7-year-old Emily made Samantha turn around. The girl was standing in the bedroom doorway, clutching a worn teddy bear. "I just couldn't sleep, sweetie," Samantha smiled, approaching her daughter. "Go have breakfast and then I'll take you to Grandma Martha's." Martha Gomez was a neighbor who looked after Emily for a small fee, while Samantha was at work. The elderly Mexican woman never asked any questions about why Sam sometimes didn't come home until the early hours of the morning, and that suited both of them fine. While Emily ate breakfast, Samantha checked her phone. 3 missed calls from a number she knew by heart. Virgil Morgan was looking for a meeting again. The city councilman from Rockridge, one of Oakland's most prestigious neighborhoods, had become a regular client about 6 months ago. At first, it was a normal business relationship. He paid her to accompany him to corporate events, where it would be inappropriate for a man of his status to show up alone. But gradually, their relationship became more complicated. Virgil began calling more often, keeping her after official meetings, sharing details of his personal life. Samantha was smart enough to understand that such closeness to an influential politician could be either her salvation or her downfall. On the other side of town, in a spacious house on Grand Avenue, Virgil Morgan stood in front of the mirror in his bedroom, adjusting his tie. At 45, he looked his age, but regular workouts and expensive clothes helped him look like a successful politician. Today, he had an important meeting with potential sponsors for his campaign for mayor of Oakland. "You're back late," Linda's voice sounded behind him. His wife was sitting on the edge of the bed, holding a cup of coffee. Even in the morning, without makeup and in her bathrobe, she was still an attractive woman. 20 years of marriage and 2 children had not diminished her natural beauty. The committee meeting ran late. Virgil didn't turn around, continuing to fiddle with his tie. "You know how it is." Linda knew. Over the years as a family psychologist, she had learned to read people like an open book. And for the past few months, her husband had been a book written in a foreign language. New habits, strange phone calls, unexplained delays at work. She tried to convince herself that it was just stress from the election campaign, but her female intuition told her otherwise. "The kids are asking when you'll be free for dinner," she said, taking a sip of coffee. "Soon. Everything will be fine after the election." Virgil turned and quickly kissed her on the cheek. "I have to go." Linda watched him walk to the door. 20 years ago, he kissed her on the lips. Now even a kiss on the cheek seemed like a formality. The Oakland Police Department on 7th Street greeted Detective Mark Coleman with the usual chaos of the morning shift. Dispatch calls, the noise of printers, conversations with colleagues. All of this created the special background against which he had been working for 15 years. At 38, Mark was one of the most experienced detectives in the homicide division, but the job had left its scars on his soul. "Coleman, we've got a case," Sergeant Rodriguez said, placing a folder on his desk. "Robbery in West Oakland. The victim is in the hospital." Mark opened the folder and scanned the report. Another robbery in a neighborhood where such incidents occurred almost every week. Nothing special, just routine work. He grabbed the keys to his patrol car and headed for the exit. On the way to the scene, Mark thought about his life. His divorce 3 years ago had left him alone in an empty apartment overlooking the bay. His job had become his only outlet, a way to forget and feel needed. Every case he solved was a small victory over the chaos that reigned in his personal life. On East 14th Street, at the Bayview Motel, Tony Sanchez was finishing his morning cleaning. His establishment was not luxurious, a typical roadside motel with 20 rooms that attracted mostly truckers and casual travelers. But Tony took pride in keeping it clean and tidy. At 35, the former Marine sergeant had found his way of coping with post-war stress. The motel gave him the structure and purpose he had so desperately needed after returning from Afghanistan. Plus, working as a night manager allowed him to observe Oakland's nightlife, and he saw a lot. For example, he knew that City Councilman Virgil Morgan regularly rented room 15 under a fake name. Tony never asked questions. In his line of work, discretion was key. But he remembered the faces and habits of his regular customers. Around noon, Samantha received a text message from Virgil. "Tonight, usual place, important talk." She looked at the message, feeling a slight unease. In the 6 months of their relationship, Virgil had never mentioned important talks. Their meetings were usually predictable: dinner at an expensive restaurant, social events, or just an evening in a motel room where they could relax away from prying eyes. But lately, something had changed. Virgil had become more tense, more cautious. Sometimes she caught him studying her with a strange expression on his face, as if he were trying to make an important decision. At the beauty salon on International Boulevard, Samantha tried to focus on her work, but her thoughts kept returning to the evening meeting. Her co-worker, Mariah, noticed her distraction. "You seem different today," she said, taking a break between clients. "Is everything okay?" "Just tired," Samantha smiled. "Emily didn't sleep well last night." That was only partly true. Emily had indeed been waking up from nightmares, but Samantha was worried about something else entirely. Over the past few weeks, she had felt that her double life was becoming increasingly dangerous. Her relationship with Virgil gave her the financial stability she so desperately needed, but she also knew she was playing with fire. A politician with ambitions to become mayor couldn't afford a scandal, and she knew enough of his secrets to destroy his career. The thought both frightened and excited her. Perhaps it was time to use that knowledge to her advantage. That evening, Linda Morgan sat in her home office, reviewing patient notes. Her work as a family psychologist required her full concentration, but today she couldn't get her mind off her husband. His behavior was becoming increasingly suspicious, and her professional experience told her that their marriage was in crisis. She went to the window and looked out at the street. Virgil should have been home for dinner, but his car wasn't in the driveway. Late at work again, important meetings again. Linda picked up the phone and dialed her husband's number. "Hi, honey." Virgil's voice sounded tense. "Is something wrong? Did you forget about dinner?" A pause. "I'm sorry, I have an important meeting. I'll be home late." "Who are you meeting?" Another pause, a longer one. "Potential sponsors. You know how important this campaign is." Linda knew when her husband was lying. 20 years of marriage had taught her to recognize the subtle changes in his voice, the pauses in the wrong places, the overly detailed explanations of simple things. "Okay," she said calmly. "See you at home." After she hung up, Linda stared at the phone for a long time. Maybe it was time to find out the truth about what her husband was really doing in the evenings. 2 weeks had passed since their last meeting when Samantha received another message from Virgil. This time, he suggested meeting at a new place, an expensive restaurant in the Jack London Square area. It was unusual. Usually they met at a motel or at private events where her presence could appear casual. Samantha carefully studied her reflection in the mirror. The black dress accentuated her figure but wasn't provocative. The pearl necklace she had bought at a pawn shop for half price looked expensive. In 6 months of working with wealthy clients, she had learned to project the image of a successful woman, even if her bank account told a different story. "Mommy, you're beautiful." Emily hugged her legs. The girl was already used to her mother dressing up for business meetings. "Thank you, sweetie. Be a good girl for Aunt Martha. I'll be back tomorrow morning." The drive to the bay took half an hour. The waterfront restaurant was exactly what she expected. Panoramic windows overlooking the bay, subdued lighting, waiters in white shirts. It was a place where politicians, businessmen, and their wives dined. It was a place where she felt like an imposter, despite her best efforts to look appropriate. Virgil was already waiting for her at a corner table. He stood up when she approached and gallantly pulled out her chair. but something about his behavior was off. His usual ease had disappeared, replaced by tension. "You look beautiful," he said, but the compliment sounded mechanical. "Thank you. An unusual place for us to meet." Virgil ordered a bottle of expensive wine, although he usually limited himself to a couple of glasses. They talked about trivial things, the weather, the renovations in her living room, his election campaign, but Samantha sensed an undertone in every word. "My campaign is gaining momentum," he said, twirling his glass in his hands. "The polls show I have a good chance." "That's wonderful." "Yes, but—" He paused, looking out the window at the lights of the bay. "Public life requires sacrifices, especially from those closest to us." Samantha felt a chill in her chest. "What do you mean?" "I think we should be more careful. Maybe stop seeing each other for a while." The words hung in the air between them. Samantha slowly put her glass down on the table. "I understand. It's not forever. Just until the election. You understand." "I understand." Her voice sounded calm, but inside she was seething. 6 months of a relationship, and he had simply decided to get rid of her like a useless thing. "What about our arrangements?" "I'll compensate you, of course," he began, reaching for his checkbook. "No, don't." Samantha stopped him with a gesture. "That's not what I'm talking about." Virgil frowned. "Then what is it?" "It's that I've learned a lot about you over the past few months. About your preferences, your plans, your weaknesses." Virgil's face changed. "What are you trying to say?" "Nothing in particular. I'm just wondering if your constituents know that their future mayor likes role-playing games in bed, or that he discusses city contracts after sex." "Samantha." "Angela," she corrected him. "To you, I'm Angela, remember?" The tension between them was almost palpable. Virgil glanced around to make sure no one was listening to their conversation. "What do you want?" he asked quietly. "Nothing right now. Just want you to remember that we're not the only ones making decisions." At that moment, in a family home in Rockridge, Linda Morgan was closing her office after her last patient of the day. Mrs. Chen, her client, had been telling her about her suspicions that her husband was cheating on her, a story that sounded painfully familiar. "Trust your intuition," Linda advised. "Women often know the truth before they're ready to accept it." After the patient left, Linda sat in her chair for a long time, thinking about her own advice. Her intuition screamed that Virgil was hiding something serious. Late nights, changed behavior, new habits, all classic signs of infidelity. She went to her home computer and opened her bank statements. If Virgil was spending money on another woman, there had to be traces. Restaurant bills, hotels, gifts, all of these things leave a digital trail. After reviewing the statements for the past 3 months, Linda found several suspicious expenses. Dinners at expensive restaurants on days when he was supposedly working late, hotel payments in the city center, purchases at a jewelry store, even though she hadn't seen any new jewelry at home. But the strangest thing was a regular expenditure of $300 every 2 weeks. The recipient was a company called Premium Services LLC. Linda found their website, but it was extremely vague. High-end consulting services. She wrote down the company's address. Tomorrow after work, she planned to pay them a visit. At the Bayview Motel, Tony Sanchez was checking the evening reservations. Room 15 was booked again under the name M. Johnson, the alias the city councilman used to rent the room. But today, something was different. Morgan usually arrived with the same woman, an elegant brunette who looked too sophisticated for such a place. Today, he was alone. Tony wasn't curious by nature, but 8 months of night shifts had taught him to read people. Morgan looked anxious, nervous. He checked his phone several times before approaching the front desk. "The usual, Mr. Johnson?" Tony asked, not looking up from the registration log. "Yes, and if anyone asks about me, I wasn't here." This was new. Morgan had never shown such paranoia before. "Of course, sir. Discretion is our policy." Morgan took the key and headed for the room. Tony watched him go, wondering what could have so alarmed such an influential politician. Detective Mark Coleman was finishing his shift when his phone rang. The dispatcher reported a domestic dispute in West Oakland. Another routine call in a long list of similar incidents. On the way to the scene, Mark thought about how the city had changed during his years of service. Oakland had always been a city of contrasts, but in recent years those contrasts had become more pronounced. Rich neighborhoods were getting richer, and poor neighborhoods were getting poorer. Crime was on the rise, and the police were struggling to cope with limited resources. The domestic dispute turned out to be more serious than expected. The man had threatened his wife with a knife, and their 3 children were hiding in the bedroom. It took Mark 2 hours to resolve the situation without using force. He arrested the man and made sure the woman and children were safe. On his way back to the station, Mark received a call from a colleague in the organized crime unit. "We have information about a possible prostitution ring linked to city officials," Detective Ramirez said. "Nothing concrete yet, but keep your ears open." "Something new in this town," Mark grinned. "Politicians and prostitutes have always found a common language." "Yes, but this time it could be blackmail. Be careful if you come across anything suspicious." After talking to Ramirez, Mark felt a slight uneasiness. Corruption among city officials was a constant problem, but blackmail raised the stakes to a new level. The next day, Samantha spent time with Emily at Lake Merritt Park. The girl was feeding the ducks while her mother pondered yesterday's conversation with Virgil. His attempt to break up with her came as no surprise, but the way he did it hurt her. She had spent months studying his habits, his weaknesses, his secrets. Now that knowledge could be her insurance. Not that she planned to blackmail him, at least not yet, but the option had to remain open. Her phone rang, an unfamiliar number. "Hello? Is this Angela?" A male voice with a slight accent. "Who's this?" "I was recommended by one of your clients, Mr. M. He said you were discreet and professional." Samantha felt irritated. Virgil had no right to give her number to other people without her consent. "I'm sorry, but I'm not taking on new clients right now. I'm willing to pay well, $500 for the evening." That was twice her usual rate. Samantha hesitated. On the one hand, she could always use the money. On the other hand, new clients always meant risk. "I need to think about it. I'll call you back in an hour." She hung up and looked at Emily, who was laughing as she watched the ducks. She was willing to do a lot for this life, but how far was she willing to go? That evening, Linda Morgan parked across from an office building in downtown Oakland, where Premium Services LLC was located. The building looked respectable, glass and steel, a marble lobby, a security guard at the entrance. But when she went up to the floor indicated on the address, she found only a common area with mailboxes. Premium Services LLC turned out to be just a mailing address, a fictitious company. Linda felt a lump in her stomach. If Virgil was paying money to a fictitious company every 2 weeks, it could only mean one thing. He was buying services that couldn't be paid for directly. On the way home, she stopped at a traffic light near the Bayview Motel. Glancing to the side, she saw a familiar silhouette at the entrance to a room. Virgil. Her husband was standing at the door of a motel in a neighborhood where he should never have been. Linda quickly parked and watched from her car. A few minutes later, a taxi pulled up to the motel, and a young woman got out. Even in the twilight, Linda could see that she was beautiful, elegant, clearly not the type to stay at a roadside motel. The woman headed straight for the room where Virgil was waiting. Linda's heart was pounding. All her suspicions were confirmed in an instant. Her husband wasn't just cheating on her, he was paying for it. The next 3 days were spent in tense anticipation. Samantha didn't answer Virgil's calls, giving him time to realize the seriousness of the situation. She understood the psychology of men like him. The more he worried, the more amenable he would become. On Thursday morning, she finally answered his call. "We need to talk." Virgil's voice sounded exhausted. "In person." "I thought you didn't want to see me anymore." "Samantha, please, this is important." She agreed to meet him at a cafe in the Temescal neighborhood, neutral territory where no one was likely to recognize them. When she arrived, Virgil was already sitting at a corner table, nervously twirling a coffee cup in his hands. He had visibly aged in the last 3 days. "You look terrible," Samantha remarked as she sat down across from him. "I haven't slept well since we last saw each other." He looked her in the eyes. "What do you want?" Straight to the point, I like that. Samantha ordered a latte and leaned back in her chair. I want justice. Be specific. $50,000, and a guarantee that after the election our relationship will continue on the same terms. Virgil paled. That's impossible, I don't have that kind of money. Your campaign does. Your wife does. Your sponsors do. Samantha took a sip of coffee. Creative financing is your specialty, isn't it? You realize this is blackmail? I realize this is business. In 6 months, I've become part of your life, your plans, your secrets. Now you just want to throw me away? That's not going to happen. Virgil looked around to make sure no one was listening to their conversation. What if I refuse? Samantha took out her phone and showed him the screen. It was a list of contacts. Journalists, political opponents, community activists. Then tomorrow, all of Oakland will know that their future mayor likes rough sex and discusses city contracts with prostitutes. She put her phone away. It's your choice. I need time to think. You have 3 days. After that, the price doubles. At that moment, Linda Morgan was sitting in her office trying to concentrate on her work, but her thoughts kept returning to what she had seen 3 days earlier. The image of her husband entering a motel room with a young woman would not leave her mind. Her next patient, Jennifer Wright, was talking about problems in her marriage, but Linda found it difficult to concentrate on her words. Dr. Morgan, are you listening to me? Jennifer asked. I'm sorry, I was lost in thought. Please continue. After the session, Linda made a decision. She couldn't live in the dark any longer. She needed proof, not for a divorce, but for her own peace of mind. 20 years of marriage deserved honesty. She hired a private investigator. Oakland Investigations had a good reputation for handling marital infidelity cases. Detective Stephen Blake was an experienced professional who guaranteed discretion. I need photos, videos, any evidence, she explained to him during their meeting. I need to know the truth. How long has this been going on? Blake asked. I suspect about 6 months. He's become different, more secretive, tense. We'll start surveillance tomorrow. Results are usually available within a week. Leaving the detective's office, Linda felt a mixture of relief and fear. Soon she would know the truth, but was she ready for it? At the police station, Detective Mark Coleman studied reports of recent crimes. The rise in domestic violence, drug dealing, and theft suggested that social tensions in the city were growing. Economic problems and growing inequality were creating a breeding ground for crime. His thoughts were interrupted by a call from Detective Ramirez of the Organized Crime Division. Mark, remember our conversation about a possible prostitution ring? Of course. We have some new information. A source reports a woman who may be blackmailing high-profile clients. Coleman sat up straight in his chair. Details. Not much yet. The woman is in her 30s and works under an alias. Her clients are politicians and businessmen. There are suspicions that she is gathering compromising information. Any names? Not yet, but the source promised more information in a few days. After the conversation, Mark thought about how such cases usually end. Blackmail rarely remains just blackmail. Sooner or later, someone decides that the victim's silence is worth more than regular payments. At the Bayview Motel, Tony Sanchez noticed a change in the behavior of his regular guests. The city councilman began to visit more often, but looked increasingly troubled. The woman who usually accompanied him had not been seen for several days. Last night, a strange incident occurred. Morgan had been sitting in room 15 for 2 hours when an elegant, middle-aged woman approached the front desk. I'm looking for my husband, she said. He may be staying here. Tony knew immediately who she was. The politician's wife looked exactly as he had imagined her. Well-groomed, intelligent, with the sad eyes of a woman who suspects her husband's infidelity. What's his name? Tony asked, even though he already knew the answer. Virgil Morgan. He may be registered under a different name. Tony hesitated. Discretion was the foundation of his business, but this woman was clearly suffering. I'm sorry, but I can't disclose information about our guests. The woman nodded, smiled understandingly, and left. But Tony saw her get into a car in the parking lot across the street and wait. An hour later, Morgan came out of his room. He saw his wife and froze. Even from 50 meters away, Tony could see the horror on his face. The couple didn't speak. The woman just started the car and drove away. Morgan stood in the parking lot for another 10 minutes, then got into his car and drove away too. Tony realized that he had witnessed the beginning of a family drama that could have serious consequences. The next day, Samantha received a call from the same stranger who had offered her services a week ago. "Have you thought about my offer?" he asked. "I said I'm not taking on new clients. $700 for one evening, no strings attached, just dinner." Samantha hesitated. That kind of money could solve many of her problems, but something in the man's voice made her wary. "Who are you?" "Just a businessman who appreciates good company. Mr. M recommended you highly." The mention of Virgil annoyed her. He had no right to recommend her to others, especially now when they had unresolved issues between them. "I'll call you back," she said, and hung up. Instead, she dialed Virgil's number. "Why are you giving my number to other people?" she asked bluntly. "What are you talking about?" "Some man called me and said you recommended him." Pause. "I didn't give your number to anyone ever." A chill ran down Samantha's spine. If Virgil was telling the truth, then someone else knew about their relationship and was trying to contact her. "Describe his voice," Virgil asked. "Male with a slight accent, maybe Spanish or Italian." "Damn it!" Virgilius's voice sounded panicked. "Don't meet with him, under no circumstances." "Why? Who is he?" "I'm not sure, but I have my suspicions. Samantha, we need to meet. Today." The alarm in his voice was genuine. Samantha agreed to meet him at the same cafe in an hour. When she arrived, Virgil was already waiting for her. He looked even worse than he had 3 days ago, sleep-deprived, nervous, constantly looking around. "Tell me everything about the calls," he said as soon as she sat down. Samantha recounted her conversations with the stranger. Virgil listened, growing darker and darker. "It could be Marco Rossetti," he said finally. "Who is that?" "A man you don't want to mess with. He takes care of problems for certain people." "What kind of people?" "People who don't want their names to come up in unpleasant stories." Virgil rubbed his face with his hands. "If he came to you, it means someone is very concerned about our relationship." Samantha felt fear. "Do you think he wants to hurt me?" "I don't know. Maybe just scare you. Or..." He didn't finish his sentence. "Or what?" "Or make you disappear." The words hung in the air between them. Samantha suddenly realized that the game she had been playing could turn out to be deadly. "What should I do?" "Leave town. Today. Take your daughter and go as far away as you can." "I don't have the money to move." Virgil took out his checkbook. $25,000. That's enough for a fresh start." Samantha looked at the check. It was half the amount she had demanded, but under the circumstances, it looked like a lifeline. "What about you?" "I'll try to find out who's behind this. Maybe I can work something out." "What if you can't?" Virgil didn't answer, but the look on his face said it all. That night, Linda Morgan lay in bed listening to her husband's breathing. He had come home late as usual, but this time she didn't ask any questions. Tomorrow, the private investigator was supposed to provide the first results of his surveillance. Virgil tossed and turned next to her, clearly unable to sleep. Several times he got up, went to the window, checked the phone. Something was bothering him greatly. "Are you okay?" she asked quietly. "Yes, just thinking about the campaign." Another lie. Linda closed her eyes and pretended to be asleep. But she heard Virgil get up and quietly leave the bedroom. A few minutes later, she heard his voice coming from the study downstairs. He was talking to someone on the phone, but she couldn't make out the words. The conversation lasted almost an hour. When Virgil returned to the bedroom, Linda smelled cigarette smoke. Her husband hadn't smoked in 10 years. At the Bayview Motel, Tony Sanchez was finishing his night shift when he noticed a suspicious car in the parking lot. A black sedan with tinted windows had been there for 2 hours, but no one had gotten out. Tony approached the car. Inside were 2 men who were watching room 15 closely, the same room Morgan regularly rented. One of the men noticed Tony and got out of the car. He was tall, broad-shouldered, with a face that had seen a lot of violence. "Do you have any rooms available?" he asked with a noticeable accent. "Of course. How many nights?" "I'll let you know." The man paid cash for a week in advance and took the key to room 8, directly opposite room 15. When he checked in, he gave his name as Marco Rossetti. Tony realized that something very dangerous was happening in his motel. Friday, March 15th, the day that changed the lives of everyone involved in this story. Samantha woke up with a heavy feeling in her chest. Virgil's check was lying on the kitchen table, $25,000 and a ticket to a new life. But something was holding her back from running away. Maybe it was stubbornness. Maybe it was a refusal to give up. Or maybe she was just tired of constantly running away from her problems. Emily was eating breakfast, chatting about her school friends, unaware of the drama unfolding around her. Samantha looked at her daughter and tried to make a decision. Running away meant admitting defeat. Staying meant risking everything. At 10 o'clock, Virgil called her. "Did you cash the check?" "Not yet." "Samantha, I'm serious. These people aren't joking. Rossetti is already in town." "How do you know?" "I have sources. He's staying at the same motel where we met." Samantha felt a chill in her stomach. "Is he watching you?" "Both of us. Leave today." "What if I don't want to?" A long pause. "Then I can't protect you." After the conversation, Samantha sat in the kitchen for a long time, considering her options. Running away seemed like the sensible choice, but she was tired of running. All her life she had adapted to circumstances, made compromises, sacrificed her interests for the sake of others. Maybe it was time to stand up for herself. At noon, she made her decision. Instead of leaving town, she called Rossetti. "I'm ready to meet," she said when he answered. "Great, tonight at 8. Seaside restaurant on the waterfront. I'll be there." Linda Morgan met with private investigator Stephen Blake at his office at 2 o'clock in the afternoon. The folder he placed in front of her was thicker than she had expected. "I'm afraid I have some unpleasant news," Blake said. "Your husband is indeed seeing another woman regularly for at least 6 months." Linda opened the folder. The photos showed Virgil entering the Bayview Motel with a young, attractive brunette. Other photos were taken in restaurants, cafes, and once in a jewelry store. "Who is she?" "Samantha Reed, 28 years old, single mother, works at a beauty salon, but that's not all." Blake turned the page. "She also works as an escort under the alias Angela." The words hit Linda like a physical blow. Her husband wasn't just cheating on her, he was paying a prostitute. "There's more," the detective continued. "It looks like there was a conflict between them. I observed a meeting at a cafe yesterday. The conversation was tense. Your husband handed her a check. Is she blackmailing him? Possibly, and that's not the worst of it." Blake showed her the last photos. They were of the same motel, but now there was an unfamiliar car in the parking lot, and next to it were men who were clearly not tourists. "I think some serious people are involved in this. My advice is to stay away from it all." Linda closed the folder. 20 years of marriage had been destroyed in one meeting. But instead of grief, she felt a strange sense of relief. At last, she knew the truth. At the police station, Detective Mark Coleman received new information from his source in the Organized Crime Division. "The woman I told you about, her name is Samantha Reed," Detective Ramirez said over the phone. "She goes by the alias Angela. One of her clients is City Councilman Virgil Morgan." Coleman wrote down the names. "Any evidence of blackmail?" "Indirect so far, but the source says there may be a meeting tonight between Reed and some people connected to organized crime." "Where?" "Unknown at this time, but I recommend keeping your ears open. These kinds of meetings rarely end well." After the call, Coleman felt a familiar sense of unease. Blackmailing politicians was commonplace in Oakland, but when professional criminals got involved, the situation became dangerous. He decided to spend the evening patrolling the areas where the meeting might take place. At the Bayview Motel, Tony Sanchez had been watching the strange activity all day. Rossetti and his partner hadn't left room 8, but Tony had seen them approach the window several times and watch the parking lot. Around 4 in the afternoon, another car pulled up to the motel, and 2 men in expensive suits got out. One of them approached the front desk. "I need to talk to Rossetti," he said. "Room 8, Tony replied, although his inner voice told him it was better not to get involved. The man headed for the room. A few minutes later, all four men came out and got into one car. Tony watched them go, hoping they wouldn't return. But at 7 o'clock, Rossetti reappeared. This time, he was alone and looked grim. "I'll need a room for the night," he said to Tony. "And I don't want to be disturbed." "Of course, Mr. Rossetti. One more thing. If the police come, you didn't see anything, and you don't know anything. Understood?" Tony nodded, though inside he felt a chill. Whatever Rossetti was planning, it didn't bode well. At 7:30, Samantha dropped Emily off at Martha Gomez's and drove to her meeting. The seaside restaurant was in a tourist area on the waterfront, a public place where she felt relatively safe. Rossetti was already waiting for her at a table overlooking the bay. Up close, he looked younger than she had imagined from his voice. Around 40, athletic with attentive dark eyes. "Angela?" He stood up when she approached. "Samantha, let's skip the pseudonyms." They ordered dinner, but Samantha barely touched her food. Rossetti was polite, even charming, but there was something about his demeanor that betrayed a sense of danger. "My client is very interested in your services," he said when the waiter brought their wine. "Who is your client?" "A man who values discretion, especially in delicate situations." Samantha realized that this was not a conversation about standard escort services. "What kind of situations?" "Those that require complete silence." Rossetti took a sip of wine. "I understand you have information about some influential people in the city." "Perhaps. My client is willing to pay well for that information, and for a guarantee that it will never surface." Samantha sensed a trap. "And if I refuse?" Rossetti smiled, but the smile didn't reach his eyes. "Then you'll have to deal with me personally." The threat was soft but unambiguous. Samantha realized she was in a situation from which there might be no escape. "How much?" she asked. "50,000 for all the information on your clients, plus your promise to leave town for good." It was the same amount she had demanded from Virgil. But now it wasn't blackmail, it was survival. "I need time to think. You have until midnight. Meet me at the Bayview Motel, room 8. Samantha nodded and got up from the table. She knew that the next few hours would determine her fate. On her way home, she stopped at an ATM and withdrew all the money from her account, about $3,000. Then she drove to Martha's to pick up Emily. "I need to go away for a few days," she said to the elderly Mexican woman. "Can you look after Emily?" "Of course, May." "But you look scared. Is everything all right?" "It will be soon." Samantha hugged her daughter, trying not to show her fear. "Mommy will be back soon, okay? Be a good girl." At 11 o'clock in the evening, Samantha pulled up to the Bayview Motel. The parking lot was almost empty, except for a few truckers' cars and Rossetti's black sedan. She saw the light in room 8. Tony Sanchez was sitting at the front desk, looking extremely worried. "Miss, maybe you shouldn't," he began, but Samantha was already heading for the room. She knocked on the door of room 8. Rossetti opened it almost immediately, as if he had been waiting for her. "Come in." The room was standard: a bed, a TV, a small table by the window. But Samantha immediately noticed that Rossetti was not alone. Standing in the corner was a second man she hadn't seen at the restaurant. "Have you made your decision?" Rossetti asked. "Yes, but first, I want to see the money." Rossetti nodded to his partner, who opened a sports bag on the bed. Inside were neat stacks of banknotes. 50,000 as agreed. Samantha took out her phone. "This is all I have on Virgil Morgan and a few other clients." "Excellent. Hand over the phone and the money is yours." Samantha held out her phone, but at the last moment, something made her stop. Maybe it was Rossetti's expression. Maybe it was the way his partner moved toward the door, blocking her exit. "What next?" she asked. "Next, you take the money and disappear, forever." "What if I don't want to disappear?" Rossetti wasn't smiling anymore. "Then we'll have a problem." At that moment, Samantha realized the full extent of the trap. They never planned to let her go. The money was just a way to get her to come here willingly. "You're going to kill me. We're going to solve a problem. Unfortunately, you've become too big of a problem for too many powerful people." Samantha rushed for the door, but Rossetti's partner was faster. He grabbed her arm, and she screamed. Behind the wall in the manager's office, Tony Sanchez heard the scream and grabbed the phone. A minute later, he was talking to the 911 dispatcher. Bayview Motel, East 14th Street. Someone needs help. Hurry. In room 8, the struggle was short and one-sided. Samantha tried to break free, but the man was stronger. Rossetti took something out of his jacket that glinted in the lamplight. "Nothing personal," he said. "Just business." The last thing Samantha heard was the sound of approaching sirens. Too late. Detective Mark Coleman received the call at 11:47 p.m. Murder at a motel on East 14th Street. When he arrived at the scene, the parking lot was already filled with police cars and an ambulance. Tony Sanchez was sitting on the steps of the office, shaking from shock. "I heard a scream," he repeated. "She screamed, and then everything went quiet." Coleman entered room 8. The body of a young woman lay on the floor, multiple stab wounds. There were almost no signs of a struggle. The murder had been quick and professional. "Victim identified?" he asked his colleague. "Samantha Reed, 28 years old. Her driver's license was in her pocket." Coleman nodded. The name was familiar from his conversation with Ramirez. The woman who had been blackmailing politicians had finally met those who had decided to solve the problem radically. "Any witnesses?" "The motel manager. He says he saw the victim enter the room around midnight. He heard a scream and called the police. When we arrived, the room was empty." "Surveillance cameras?" "They haven't been working for 6 months." Coleman examined the room. The killers were professionals. No fingerprints, no clues. Just a dead woman and the secrets that died with her. And somewhere in the city, a 7-year-old child was sleeping, who would wake up an orphan in the morning. On the morning of March 16th, Oakland woke up to news of a murder. Local media quickly picked up the story of a young woman found dead in a roadside motel. The journalists didn't know all the details yet, but Detective Mark Coleman knew this was just the beginning. At 8 a.m., he sat in the interrogation room across from Tony Sanchez. The motel owner looked exhausted. He hadn't slept all night answering questions from the police. "Tell me again about the guests in room 8, Coleman asked. "Marco Rossetti checked in 3 days ago. He paid cash. He said he'd stay until I told him to leave." Tony rubbed his face with his hands. "I knew he wasn't a tourist. You can spot those guys right away." "How often did he meet with other people?" "Yesterday afternoon, 2 men in expensive suits came by. They talked in the room for about an hour, then left together. Rossetti returned alone around 7 in the evening." "And the woman? Samantha Reed?" "I've seen her before. She was meeting another regular here, a man who registered under the name M. Johnson." Coleman sat up straight. "Describe this Johnson." "About 45, well-dressed, expensive car. He rented room 15 every 2 weeks for 6 months." "Do you have his registration records?" "Of course, but he always paid cash and presented fake documents. I knew, but..." Tony shrugged. "In my line of work, we don't ask questions." Coleman understood. In Oakland, half the motels existed thanks to clients who preferred anonymity. Did this M. Johnson ever cross paths with Rossetti? Not directly, but Rossetti specifically chose the room across from where Johnson and the woman were meeting. He was watching them. The pieces of the puzzle were starting to fit together. Coleman suspected that M. Johnson was the politician Samantha had been blackmailing, and Rossetti was working for someone who wanted to solve the problem once and for all. After the interrogation, Coleman drove to Samantha Reed's house in Fruitvale. The hardest part of the job was ahead of him, talking to the victim's family. Martha Gomez opened the door, her eyes red from crying. Hiding behind her was Emily, a little girl with dark hair and huge, frightened eyes. "The police came this morning," Martha said. "They said Samantha was gone." Coleman crouched down in front of Emily. "Hi, my name is Mark. I'm a police officer. I'm trying to find out what happened to your mom." The girl remained silent, clutching a teddy bear tightly. "Emily, did your mom ever talk about people who scared her? Anyone who might have hurt her?" "She said we might have to leave," the girl said quietly. "Last night, she said she'd be back soon, but..." Tears rolled down her cheeks. Coleman felt a familiar pain in his chest. In 15 years on the job, he had seen many victims of crime, but children always affected him the most. "We'll find whoever did this," he promised. even though he knew that in cases like this, promises were often empty words. Searching Samantha's apartment, Coleman found what he was looking for, a notebook hidden in a book with names, dates, and amounts. The entries covered the last 8 months and included details about various clients. One name appeared more often than others: VM. Meetings every 2 weeks, large sums of money, notes about business conversations. In the corner of the last page was written, "VM is panicking, threatening exposure, demanding compensation." Coleman photographed all the pages. He had a lead. Meanwhile, at the city council office, Virgil Morgan was trying to focus on his work, but he couldn't get the news about the motel murder out of his head. He didn't yet know that the victim was Samantha, but he couldn't shake the uneasy feeling. At 10 o'clock, he received a call from an unknown number. "Mr. Morgan, this is Detective Coleman from the Oakland Police Department. I need to ask you a few questions." Virgil's heart skipped a beat. "About what?" "About your acquaintance with Samantha Reed. Can you come to the station voluntarily, or should I send a car?" Virgil closed his eyes. It was over. "I'll come in." An hour later, he was sitting in the same interrogation room where Tony Sanchez had been that morning. Detective Coleman studied him with professional interest. "How long did you know Samantha Reed?" "About 8 months." "The nature of your relationship?" Virgil hesitated. His lawyer would have advised him to remain silent, but it was too late for caution. "She provided me with escort services." "For money?" "Yes." "When did you last see her?" 3 days ago. We met at a cafe." Coleman placed photos from Samantha's notebook on the table. "Was she blackmailing you?" Virgil looked at the notes and realized that denial was pointless. "Yes. How much did you pay her?" $25,000. I wanted her to leave town." "But she refused?" "She said she'd think about it." Coleman leaned forward. "Mr. Morgan, Samantha Reed was murdered last night. Where were you between 11 p.m. and 1 a.m.? Virgil's world collapsed. "She's dead." "Answer the question." "I was at home, with my family. We had dinner, then watched a movie." "Can anyone confirm that?" "My wife, my children." Coleman wrote down the statement. Morgan's alibi seemed plausible, but it didn't rule out his involvement in organizing the murder. "Do you know Marco Rossetti?" Virgil paled. "How do you know that name?" "Answer the question." "I've heard of him. A man who solves problems for certain people." "What kind of people?" "Influential people. Politicians, businessmen, people who can't afford scandals." "Have you been in contact with him?" "No, never." Virgil was sincere. "Samantha mentioned his name herself. She said someone sent him." "Who exactly?" "I don't know." She didn't know either. Coleman studied Morgan's face. The politician looked frightened and confused, but not like someone who had organized a murder. More like a puppet in someone else's game. After the interrogation, Coleman contacted Detective Ramirez. "What can you tell me about Marco Rossetti?" "A mercenary, works for people who prefer to stay in the shadows, specializes in problem solving, if you know what I mean." "Who hires him?" "Usually not politicians directly. There are middlemen, people who finance campaigns, lobbyists, big businessmen. They don't want to get their hands dirty, so they hire people like Rossetti." "Any ideas who might have ordered Samantha Reed's murder?" "Give me a day. I'll check my sources." While Coleman waited for information from Ramirez, he decided to visit Linda Morgan. The politician's wife might know more than her husband thought. The house in Rockridge was quiet when he arrived. Linda opened the door, looking as if she hadn't slept all night. "Mrs. Morgan? I'm Detective Coleman. Can I come in?" She led him into the living room. On the coffee table lay an open folder with photographs, a private investigator's report. "You already know," Coleman remarked. "I hired a detective a week ago. I suspected my husband was having an affair." Linda sat down on the sofa, folding her hands in her lap. "I didn't know it was so serious. Did your husband tell you about his problems with Samantha Reed?" "No, but he's been very nervous lately. He hasn't been sleeping well, and I've seen him talking on the phone in his office for a long time, several times. Do you know who he might have been talking to?" "No, but..." Linda hesitated. "The night before last, I saw him write a phone number on a piece of paper. Then he burned it, but I remembered a few digits." She dictated what she remembered. Coleman wrote down the number even though he knew that partial information was not enough to identify the caller. "Mrs. Morgan, do you think your husband is capable of murder?" Linda was silent for a long time. Virgil is a weak man. He makes bad decisions, he lies, he cheats, but murder… She shook her head. "He's not a murderer. He's too much of a coward for that." Coleman believed her. Over the years, he had learned to distinguish murderers from their victims. Virgil Morgan was a victim of his own weaknesses, but not a cold-blooded killer. That evening, Ramirez called Coleman back. "I have information about a possible client." "I'm listening." "James Carroll, construction magnate, owns half the major projects in Oakland. Last year, he was awarded several lucrative city contracts." "Any connection to Morgan?" "Morgan voted to approve those contracts. If information about his connection to a prostitute came to light, it would cast doubt on the legality of his decisions. Millions of dollars could be at stake." "Any proof?" "My source saw Carroll's people meeting with Rossetti 2 days ago. Unofficially, of course." Coleman felt the case beginning to come together. Samantha wasn't just blackmailing Morgan. She was threatening the entire chain of corruption that was making millions for certain people. The next morning, he received a search warrant for Carroll's office. But when the police arrived at the skyscraper in downtown Oakland, it turned out that the bird had flown. Carroll had left town the night before, officially on a business trip to Asia. "Convenient time for traveling," Coleman's partner remarked grimly. Rossetti had also disappeared. His motel room had been professionally cleaned. No fingerprints, no DNA, no other clues. Even the surveillance cameras in the motel area had mysteriously failed to work that night. Coleman realized he was up against a well-organized system. The people behind Samantha's murder had enough influence and resources to cover their tracks. A week later, he was sitting in his office reviewing the case files. Formally, the investigation was ongoing, but everyone knew that the chances of arresting the killers were slim to none. There was a knock at the door. Linda Morgan entered. "Detective, I brought something that might interest you." She placed a voice recorder on the table. "Last night, Virgil received a phone call. He didn't know I recorded the conversation." Coleman turned on the device. Virgil's voice sounded tense. "Hello?" "Mr. Morgan," an unfamiliar male voice. "The problem has been taken care of. You have nothing to worry about." "I didn't ask for…" "It doesn't matter what you asked for. What matters is that you're safe now. And I hope you remember this favor when you become mayor. Who are you?" "A friend. Influential people always have friends." The recording cut off. Coleman looked at Linda. "You understand what this means?" "Yes. My husband didn't order the hit, but now he owes the killers." "Why did you bring this to me?" "Because that girl didn't deserve to die. And because I don't want my husband to be a puppet for criminals." The next day, Coleman handed the recording over to the district attorney's office. A week later, the local media received an anonymous copy. The scandal destroyed Virgil Morgan's political career in a matter of days, but Samantha Reed's killers were never found. A month later, Coleman visited Emily at her new foster home. The girl had adapted better than he expected, but her eyes still showed her loss. "Did you catch the bad guys?" she asked. Coleman couldn't lie to a child. "Not yet, but I won't stop trying. Mom said that police officers protect good people from bad people." "Your mom was right. Sometimes it works, sometimes it doesn't, but we always try." Emily nodded with a seriousness beyond her years. As he left the foster home, Coleman thought about how often justice remained elusive in his line of work. Samantha Reed was far from a saint. She was a prostitute and a blackmailer, but she was a mother trying to provide for her daughter. And she didn't deserve to die for threatening the profits of corrupt politicians and businessmen. Virgil Morgan retired and moved his family to another state. His political career was over, but he was still alive. James Carroll continued to run his business from abroad, out of reach of American justice. Marco Rossetti disappeared into the criminal underworld, ready for new jobs. And in Oakland, life went on. New politicians promised to fight corruption. New businessmen looked for ways to influence city decisions. New women fell into the trap of prostitution and blackmail. Samantha Reed's story became a warning about the price of ambition and corruption in a city where power and money meant more than human life. But warnings, as Coleman understood, rarely stop those who have already sold their souls to the devil. The only bright spot in this dark story was Emily, a little girl who got a chance at a better life. Her new adoptive parents were good people who gave her the love and stability she deserved.